Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Stop Surviving, Start Thriving, Preventing Human Service Burnout. Hi, my name is Ted Isidore. I'm from Full Potential Coaching Consulting. And this is a really valuable topic area because it affects so many counselors and social workers that get in the business for all the right reasons and end up leaving early for all the wrong reasons. So Full Potential is really committed to providing these kind of trainings to inspire and also give direction and more about kind of like how to implement some good strategies and tools to stay fresh in the field. So today's agenda, we're going to do a little intro, talk about the purpose, the what, why, and how. And then we have the Scoville Resiliency and Self-Care Inventory that was emailed out to participants who signed up before. And I'll highlight some of those key aspects of that inventory. And then I'm going to define and discuss burnout, positive factors of professional longevity, and then I'm going to cover the top 10 TED tips to prevent burnout. And then I'll take some Q&A. And so if you have a question at the end of today's live webinar, you can either email me at tedisidore@gmail.com, or if you're on Google+, you can hit the Q&A button and write in that question. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm called Ted the Person. The reason I show these two slides is one is the exercise component, which has been so valuable to me over my 23 years out in the field and letting me kind of let go of work and build my body, build my mental capabilities, and really transition home. And then also the second photo, you can see me there in the background. And then if you look at the other person, that's my wife, Jill, over on the right. And we went to Kenya, Africa as global volunteers for about 3 weeks. And this occurred in 2007. And during that time, I'd been a full-time AODA counselor, doing the typical like 20 to 25 hours, client contact hours, individual group sessions, all that good stuff. And I think at that point, really kind of feeling the grind and probably having some cynicism and maybe some low energy entering the picture. And so she came up with this great idea: let's be volunteers in Africa. And I went along for the ride, so to speak. I'd never left the country before. And so we spent 3 weeks down there working in an HIV/AIDS clinic, and it was really life-changing, I think, from a lot of standpoints. One is I married her shortly thereafter. But two is it allowed me to get away from the field for a while and absorb myself in something completely different. And because it was completely different, it was really inspiring. And so when I came back after those 3 weeks, I really had a different perspective. And I really popped some questions to myself of how can I stay juiced up and still passionate in my work here in the AODA field and mental health field, and what's going to give me more meaning in my profession. So what I identified is Ted loves the variety and the spice of life. And so my background is I've been out in the field for about 23 years. You can see my letters up on the top there. I've kind of sampled everything out in the field pretty much, from in-home to residential to day treatment to managing a crisis center to doing conventional outpatient counseling, individuals, couples, families, groups. I worked extensively in the domestic violence field, and then also worked with a lot of court-ordered unmotivated clients. And I think my clients have become the greatest teachers over the years. And what they've taught me about is it's really about them and where they want to go in treatment. And my mindset and my view of that shifted over the years. And when I began to really gravitate towards this idea that, wait a second, I don't really have to do a whole lot in terms of, getting them to do anything. It's really connecting, providing some good tools and strategies, and doing my best with them, and realizing that they will take it where they want to take it, either to benefit themselves or maybe benefit themselves down the road. So one of the key concepts I put together over the years is this idea of experiences shape our lives. It's definitely shaped my life. And when I look at, how have I been able to, maintain a reasonable amount of freshness, get over some obstacles of burnout over the years, and sort of rejuvenate myself and stay fresh, it really points to these 4 keys. And we'll talk a little bit more about these keys in other research that relates to these keys as well later on. But what I figured out was my tendency to be open to learning new things and growing as a person, and always trying different things and learning about different treatments, different ways to work with clients, that actually really fueled passion for me in the field. The second point is accept that you're not going to totally get it right all the time. I think so often we get out in the field fresh out of graduate school and we want to do all the right things and help people in the best possible way, and get them on their journey and be a useful tool in that journey, but we're not going to totally get it right. And once I realized that I'm not on a mission of getting it right, but rather on a mission of really learning and getting it right most of the time through learning, that it really blossomed for me in terms of passion. The third point is practicing and learning from our mistakes over time. I think all too often, we're too hard on ourselves. We expect ourselves to make the perfect and right decisions all the time. And we're human. And it's that realization that we're human and that we make mistakes and that we can learn and get better that is really, I think, the key to avoiding burnout long term. And of course, the last point, which actually served out to be the most crucial for me, and I think I'm really blessed that I was able to get the right support from the right kind of supervisors and the right mentors that led me down the path of thriving rather than surviving. And I've seen this all too often in a number of agencies I've worked and consulted with over the years, is that sometimes you're not going to get the greatest supervisor in the world. Sometimes the director is not going to be the greatest director in the world. But it doesn't stop someone for seeking out additional support so that you can get that positive affirmation, that support, that instruction, those ideas to prosper a long time in the field of mental health and addiction counseling. And it's just really important things to remember. So let's get a better perspective on ourselves. That's my little guy. He's 5 years old. And I think my transition, the reason why I included this slide is because having him and having 2 other kids and having a family life really helped me transition from a nonstop hectic pace work at like a mental health or addiction clinic and transition so that I could leave work at work and get into home. And so having those like lively, loving, energetic relationships at home, really, the kind of relationships you look forward to seeing every night, really is a useful tool in kind of having that transition happen from work to home. So in looking at ourselves, the self-assessment, the Skyvolt Practitioner Professional Resiliency and Self-Care Inventory was sent out to people that signed up early. This was developed by Thomas Skyvolt, and I've had communication with him, and he's allowed me to use this assessment. It hasn't been standardized, but the really cool thing about this particular assessment is it's aimed towards self-awareness. And I think the only way to prevent burnout is to become more aware of where we fall on that continuum. where our strength areas are and where our weak areas are. So if we were to look at the inventory, it has basically 4 subscales that ask questions that pertain to professional vitality, personal vitality, professional stress, and personal stress. And if you look at the first category, professional vitality, typical questions on that inventory, on that scale, are like, I find my work as a practitioner or as a student to be meaningful. I view self-care as an ongoing part of my professional work and student life. I have the energy to make these positive attachments with my clients, my supervisor, my coworkers. The director is dedicated to practitioner welfare. So the scale is from 1 to 5, with 5 being strongly agree, 1 being with strongly disagree. And it's not meant, I mean, you arrive at a numeric score for each of the scales. So the professional vitality has 8 total questions. So the most you can get is 40. I guess the least you could get would be 8. But he didn't develop that in terms of like getting a numeric score and saying this is what it means. Rather, you look at the particular items and maybe see where you might rate, where you disagreed with the items, which would be a 1 or 2. And take a look at those areas as well as your strength areas. And so this is so much my pet peeve with the world today, is that we give so many people so many ideas about what to do, but we never explain like the how part. So to actually take this first subscale of professional vitality, it would be look at the questions that you scored 1 and 2 at. Those could be potential weak areas. And I think that in general, we'll kind of be able to know what our weak areas are. This just brings it out in a more specific example and in a more clear way to see it. And so, for instance, if I had number 8 on this scale, my work environment is like a greenhouse where everything grows because the conditions are such that I feel support in my professional work, and I rated that as strongly disagree, that's saying, wait a second, I don't feel that strongly that I'm supported at the agency I work with, or my supervisor, or my director. So then that poses the question, what can I do about that? What steps can I take? What actions could I take to sort of turn the tide in that area? The next scale is personal vitality. And that has items such as I have plenty of humor and laughter in my life. I feel loved by intimate others. I have positive, close friendships. I'm physically active and receive the benefits of exercise. So it's really looking at our personal lives and what's going on there and how alive that is. So once again, you can look at these scale scores and look at obviously your strength areas and build on those, but then also pay attention to where you might fall. You might rate in the 1 or 2 range, and then pinpoint specific action steps you might be able to take to once again turn the tide on those items. The third subscale is professional stress, which has items such as I've been able to find a satisfactory level of support. There are many contradictory messages about both practicing self-care and meeting expectations of being a highly competent practitioner student. I'm working to find a way through these contradictory messages. I have found a way to have high standards for my work, yet avoid unreachable perfectionism. So these will kind of begin to pinpoint, once again, strength and weak areas that you can target, especially on the professional stress level, that could really make the difference for you. So for instance, item 27 is, I'm excited to learn new ideas, methods, theories, techniques in my field. If I'm rating I strongly disagree with that, it's not saying that I'm burned out, but it's an indicator that that's an area I should definitely look at and then develop an action plan, once again, around the question, which would be in this circumstance, how can I become more excited about learning new ideas and methods and theories? How can I get that passion rolling again? What journals do I need to read? What colleagues do I need to talk to? And then the fourth area is personal stress. And that evaluates your stress level on a personal side. And those items kind of pertain to my family relationships are satisfying. I have one or more supportive communities where I feel connected. I'm able to cope with significant losses in my life, and I have time for reflective activities. So once again, looking at strength in weak areas, building on the strengths, and then taking note of the weak areas and saying, wait a second, maybe these are areas I want to target and get some action steps towards. So for instance, I'm able to cope with significant losses in my life. If I feel like, wait a second, I've lost my mom or my father, and to share a personal story, I did lose my father probably about 15 some years ago. And I was working full-time at a mental health agency. And it really gave me insight in terms of how that can impact a counselor and how it impacted me and my ability to not only grieve the loss of my father, but then be able to sort of like walk through the doors of a mental health agency and be there for like 20 some clients a week. There's not enough dialogue and discussion and conversation about this aspect. I think like you generally get the funeral leave, your supervisor will check in with you periodically over the months. And obviously if you have a very supportive agency, they'll ask, do you need some more time off? Do we want to reduce your caseload? Those are all positive, very healthy signs of a great agency to work for. But oftentimes the agency sometimes forgets about it after about a month or two. And that's when, when you look at the grief process, it really got me. So I needed additional support for that. So I sought that out, and I was successfully able to make that transition. So I guess this would be a personal shout out to all the mental health social work supervisors out there, that when a counselor does lose a loved one, that you definitely want to keep it on the barometer and definitely keep it on the radar in terms of when you meet with them in supervision. But keep checking in with them, up to 6 months to a year later, even a couple of years later, asking them, where they're at in their grief cycle and maybe how that's impacting the work or not impacting their work, and what other supports the agency and you can give them. And then the last item here on this slide is, what is your plan of action? And I think that's what it's all about. So I've sampled a lot of positive psychology, standard psychology, 80s, 90s, 2000 stuff. Been reading all kinds of research and books, and definitely one of the threads that run through everything is you can think about a lot of things. Like I could think about, all right, I want to get my professional vitality up, and I'm going to think about that. But if you don't develop a plan of action and then follow through with that action, you're probably going to stay at the same spot. You'll probably take the same inventory and get almost the same identical scale score 6 months later. So I'm going to be emphasizing throughout this webinar, you want to become aware, you want to identify, and you want to get a good plan of action, and then you want to actually follow through with it, because that's where real change happens, and that's where you'll stay alive in the field. So professional outlook in the profession. So employment of mental health counselors and marriage and family therapists is actually projected to grow by almost 30% over the next 10 years, much faster than the average of for all occupations. Growth is expected as more people have mental health services and they have insurance. It kind of makes sense. And so I read a recent article just last night that the American Counseling Association put out that said that we actually, by the year 2020, could have a shortage of counselors and social workers out in the field. So if you translate that thought around the burnout idea, you say, well, wait a second. If there's not enough counselors to go around for an increasing demand of mental health and addiction services, what is that going to mean for counselors and social workers? Well, it means that the organization is going to be put into a bind, and it probably might translate to increased caseloads, less supervision, more client time, and less support. And what does that actually equal to? Well, people leaving the profession early, and we are losing a lot of good people. And the American Counseling Association estimates, the research really varies, in terms of giving it like a definite number, but it looks like anywhere from 8 to 15% of people will actually meet the criteria for burnout and leave the field early. So enough of this gloom and doom, Ted. So I'm going to tell you about what burnout is. I want to give you those basics, and then we'll kind of march on to, obviously helpful tools and strategies and things to think about. So Pines and Aronson in 1988 described burnout as a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. Mashlock and others define burnout as a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. What does that actually translate to in real life for a counselor or social worker? It's sitting in your office, hearing 5 or 6 clients a day tell you potentially horrific stories about abuse, neglect, terrible situations they've been into. And then you hearing that story and then ultimately being able to somehow encapsulate it so you don't take it on a personal level, but you can still supply enough empathy to the client that you can actually connect with them so that they can trust you, and then you can help them better articulate that particular issue for themselves through a variety of therapies, etc. So this is the one thing they don't prepare you for in graduate school. I remember back in '92 going through graduate school, and I think we had about a total of 8 hours on burnout that they talked to us about. And I think like this is definitely an area graduate schools I think are doing a better job at, but it's like to really prepare beginning counselors to like what a typical day of work would be if you're a full-time mental health or social worker at a community mental health agency, an addiction clinic, etc. It's like, well, yeah, how are you going to deal with that? What vulnerability factors do you have that might make you more susceptible to developing a stress reaction and burnout? And so I hope that if there's any graduate schools tuning in, that they spend more time in the planning process saying, do we obviously want to produce great social workers and counselors, but then can we actually, do them this great service of really preparing them? Sort of like when you think about, how the Army sort of prepares soldiers for battle. They don't like train them for 4 hours or 8 hours. They train them a long time, and they prepare them mentally and physically, as well as on an emotional level. So now what we're going to talk about, which is the cool part, is differentiating between, what is stress and what is burnout, because sometimes they become sort of looped together. But everybody has a stress reaction, but not everybody experiences burnout. So anybody who's been out in the field will say that they've had stressful days. They've encountered stressful situations. But not every counselor that has encountered those situations will reach the point of burnout, because burnout is a progression that builds on stress reactions. So to define what stress is, it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So soldiers in combat, they experience all kinds of stress. Counselors, social workers listening to horrific stories of abuse and neglect in life circumstances, that can create stress reactions. Unfortunately, the body doesn't know the difference at times and will create physiological responses to when you experience a stress reaction. It's the fight or flight response. So if we become stressed out from hearing a story and it really bothers us, we're going to have an increase in cortisol, which is our stress hormone. Our adrenaline is going to rise. It's not necessary that we're in a life or death situation, but we're having those body reactions to what we're hearing. And as I'll comment on later, this can lead to long-term health problems. So on the other side of the table is what burnout is. So burnout is really characterized by disengagement, detachment, loss of motivation, can lead to detachment and depression. People sometimes think like life isn't worthwhile, that you have blunted emotions, and at its core, it really produces this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And when you look on the other side of the table, stress reactions, you see loss of energy, but you see could lead to anxiety disorders. Its primary damage is physical. It's actually short-lived. It's all about hyperactivity, urgency, and overengagement. So it's important to understand that difference. So how we manage our stress reactions has a lot to do if we go down the road of burnout. So I developed this burnout equation, which is stressful events plus years in the field plus less protective factors will produce a burned out counselor or social worker. Well, on the other hand, stressful events plus years in the field plus more protective factors can not only cancel out burnout, but it also could lead us down the direction of really thriving in the field. So this is, I wanted to include this slide, which is compassion fatigue. This is like probably the first most classic book in the field about compassion fatigue. Is written by Dr. Charles Figley. And he really talked about compassion fatigue, which has always been referred to as secondary traumatic stress, or the third one is vicarious traumatizations. I think we put different spins on this concept idea. But I thought he said it best when he said that it's the natural consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about a traumatizing event experienced by a significant other. The stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. Ultimately, hearing enough stories can lead us to be fatigued in the compassion department. So what's the results of compassion fatigue if I hear enough of these stories? And I think back to my days in the domestic violence world. So I did 3 men's domestic violence groups 3 times a week for 3 years, 10 guys in a group. So that's 30 stories a week. In one group times 3, that's 90 stories a week. And let's just say times 50 is what? I mean, think about what an astronomical number that becomes after 3 years. And so there really needs to be more of a focus in at agencies around the state and even around the country on, what is our agency's view on how much is too much? Instead, what we get caught up in is a reactive response to increased number of clients coming through the door, how to parcel them out to the counselors, how to provide really good treatment. But the bottom line is that the support in this area really drops out. And the results of that is that you see some counselors that mimic PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. They feel disconnected, emotionally numb and helpless. They might withdraw from the responsibilities, especially their work responsibilities, begin to procrastinate, isolate themselves, take out frustrations on others, and maybe take frustrations out on clients in session. You might see increased absenteeism, skipping work, coming late, leaving early. I mean, these are the results of what happens if we don't tune into this very significant issue. And so I'm going to keep the gloom and doom bandwagon going, and then we're going to shine the big light on where we can go from here. But I want to present in this webinar just the hardcore facts. And the hardcore facts are these: 86% of emergency room nurses had moderate to high levels of compassion fatigue. I mean, this slide's about doctors and nurses. Physicians were more likely to have symptoms of burnout, 37.9% versus 27.8%, and to be dissatisfied with their work-life balance. And then we get into the toll it can take on counselors and social workers. I mean, these are great studies. This stuff is coming out more and more, but we're looking at, in a study of 151 community mental health workers in Northern California, they found that 54% had high emotional exhaustion and 38% reported depersonalization rates. Sample of 29 directors of community mental health centers in Iowa, over 2/3 reported high emotional exhaustion and low personal accomplishment. Siebert in 2005, 751 respondents, 36% scored in the high range of emotional exhaustion. And it's not like this is new information, but it's the reality of the system we're working in. Here's Adams in 2006 reported 43% of social workers reported irritability and emotional exhaustion in the previous year. 42% of social workers report doubts about therapeutic success. Once again, let's keep this on the radar. If you're in supervision with your, with your supervisor, or you're a supervisor yourself, and you see counselors or social workers that are saying, wait a second, this client's going nowhere, and the majority of their caseload is going nowhere, I mean, this is where this result comes from. And so it's to ask the question, how to deliver support, how can we improve client outcomes, and give you the right training, like for instance, in motivational interviewing, or maybe dialectical behavioral therapy, because that has a lot of coaching aspects to it. And those two particular have been evidence-based and research-based to produce pretty good results with clients. So, and this is a shout out to nurses, because I have a lot of nurse friends and talk to nurses. So they report that 10% of them are dependent on drugs, making the incidence of drug abuse and addiction among nurses consistent with that of the US population. So once again, that's a coping strategy. So Ted, what are the work issues related to burnout? Well, these are tangible physical signs that you can see. So we'll run through them. Feeling like you have little or no control over your work. Counselors and therapists that are getting burned out in their job, they'll definitely report feeling overwhelmed and out of control. They'll also say that they have a lack of recognition or rewards of good work. And so actually when you delve into the research in human resources, which is where my business degree took me, you really begin to look at job satisfaction. A lot of people think like increased pay is what's going to keep social workers and counselors here at the agency. I do think that's probably in the top 3, but actually what's above that is lack of recognition or rewards of good work. If you can do it in a very real and not phony way, recognize people on a weekly or monthly basis for their good work and name those specifics, that goes a long way in terms of creating not just healthy counselors and social workers, but healthy organizations. Another work issue is unclear, overly demanding job expectations, not getting enough support to field the technological obstacles to become more efficient, and how to do case notes, paperwork, etc. Doing the same thing. So what we generally do in the field is somebody does well with PTSD clients, for instance, or abuse victims. I've seen this done time and time again. It's a tragedy. What we do as agencies, we load them up with more of those type of clients, which ultimately, if they're not given enough support and enough variety, could actually have them exit stage left early. And we don't want that stuff happening. And of course, working in a chaotic or high pressure environment. So lifestyles connected to burnout, working too much, working those 50, 60-hour weeks, not being able to disconnect from work, losing track of our friends, being expected to do too many things for just way too many people, taking on too many responsibilities, and ultimately not getting enough sleep, which a lot of great physiological research has come out on the benefits of a good night's sleep and how that can impact your body on an emotional, physical, and mental level. Lack of close supportive relationships. Here's the common personality traits as we delve into the research. I call this the big 4, but it's sort of like if we were to create the perfect burnout, like we took a counselor out of graduate school and we're going to burn them out, we'd probably say, have some of these personality traits, be perfectionistic, have a negative view of yourself and the world, have a high need to be in control because you won't delegate your responsibilities, you won't look for help, and then be a super high achiever. I think if you combine those personality traits with, let's say, this kind of lifestyle, and these, I think you can actually really lead one down the direction of burnout probably within a couple of years. So these are the tangible physical or emotional and mental signs of burnout. So if you start feeling a sense of failure, self-doubt, feeling helpless, trapped, you start getting detached, disconnected with your clients, from your clients, and disconnected really in your relationships at home. You start losing motivation. You get that pit in your gut on Sunday about having to go back to work. You begin to have a cynical outlook about the field, about the people you're working with, about your agency, and you have a decreased sense of satisfaction. Those are very tangible signs. Physical signs are feeling tired. You might start getting sick more, frequent headaches, backaches. change in appetite or sleep habits. This stuff goes across occupations, by the way, as well. I mean, these are very concrete signs that if you start experiencing these or variations of these, it's time to take a good look and inventory about kind of how your life is going, your personal and professional life, then how you can sort of map out a new journey, a new pathway. So these, once again, are behavioral responses to burnout. We see the procrastinating, the isolating, the skipping work. I mean, these are very common responses. So let's get to the good stuff, Ted. Now that the dark cloud has cleared, a sun has arisen. And here's the top 10 success protective factors. So Ronstadt and Skyvolt have been researching this for several years, and they wrote this phenomenal book about the developing practitioner. Basically what they did is, I'm not going to provide a comprehensive summary of the book, but what they became curious about is not about like who burns out, who doesn't make it, but rather let's find the people that have been out in the field for 20 years that are relatively fresh. They not only are fresh personally, but fired up professionally and doing well in the field and have a positive outlook for the field, positive outlook on their career, as well as the field of counseling, mental health, and addictions, etc. So what I love about this is, because I've been into this looking at success, building on strengths, resiliencies, and peak performance literature. And what I love about these guys is that they went there and they started having discussions and conversations with clinics up in Minnesota. And they began to identify in their research counselors just starting out, counselors sort of like intermediate, have been out in the field for 5 to 10 years, and then the sort of master counselors, which were actually voted in as a master counselor by their peers in a lot of their research, as like, what is going on with these people that they've been out in the field so long and they're not cynical. They have a bright outlook. And so what I've highlighted is the top 10 success protective factors. These are, when they look at these master counselors that have been successful out in the field for all these years, these are the top 10 traits or things they engaged in that they figured out. And once again, the thing that's not talked about is that there's a development and evolution of a counselor from when they first start out, there's certain obstacles there, to then when they become an intermediate counselor with the obstacles and learnings that go in that phase of your career. And then as you proceed 20 years out, that maturity, that experience, and then there serves to be other obstacles, in that realm as well. So what I'm super stoked about is this top 10. And what they found about these people is that they focused in on work mastery and professional development. They never reached the end point. There's always something new to learn. They mastered the cycle of caring, which is kind of like, in a nutshell, is you meet with people, you engage, you connect, you help them, and then the session ends. And then you have sessions that are only hour long, and then you work with that person over several weeks or months. And then that also pertains to the cycle of caring when you stop your work with a client, or a client terminates early. So it's about like, how do you handle that? How do you start up? How do you connect? How do you then disconnect and then reconnect with the next client? They found as they had mastery of the cycle of caring, and they used emotional and mental strategies to achieve that. They were able to pace oneself, to not give too much. So they said, I have a job, I want to do great at it, but I also have this like kick butt personal life that I love. And I'm definitely gonna, at 5 o'clock, I'm doing my best from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. But when I get home, it's all about spending time in my hobbies, with my wife, with my kids, with my good friends. And they were able to kind of disconnect from work and then really have a high energy, stoked environment at home. And they embraced in general the human nature of people, that there's ambiguity. We're not always going to know the direction a client's going to go. I mean, I've probably heard thousands upon thousands of stories about particular client situations, and there's always the surprises. Clients that start out well that fizzle out, that don't do as well as we think, and then clients that start out super rocky and unengaged that become engaged, and you end with them and they feel great. And you can kind of see like, wow, this person's really had the right direction. My work with them really paid off. They enjoy the small victories. They chunk it down. They say, wait a second, I might have had 3 not so good sessions today, but this one particular session I had, this client really made progress, and I'm going to stay at this, and I'm going to revel in the glory of that progress, because I don't want to have that negativity take over for me. And they remember what they're doing is important, honorable. I mean, come on, people, you're helping the human race on some level. You're dealing with some of the most, you know, I don't want to say troubled individuals, but really they have a lot of emotional and mental challenges, and they don't have a lot of resources, and you're the line in. You're in the trenches. I mean, that is what it's about. You're impacting people on a huge level. What they found is another common personality trait was they were in general aimed at, they just wanted to grow as people, professionally and personally. They were invested in engaging in new hobbies. I was going to say new habits. So I hope that gets a little chuckle out of people. They're willing to engage in new hobbies, engage in different relationships, keep themselves open, reading new stuff, different disciplines as well. They had enthusiasm and excitement for the work, and they were always into the new developments of the field. So they stayed active in continuing education and bettering their skills. And I think connected with that is getting the right mentorship. And what they found is intense physical exercise. They all seem to have exercise regimens. They weren't like famous triathletes or marathon runners, but they engaged in exercise 3 to 4 times a week, and they saw the benefits of it. And then obviously the common, what everybody could have guessed in the audience, is having fun. They were humorous and playful. So I know I'm throwing throw a lot at you. I just want you to take at least like a minute now and write down, out of those 10 characteristics, pick out maybe like 1 or 2 of them that you think you're really good at, and then pick out 1 that you think you could work on. And then the one that you're going to work on, develop like maybe 1 or 2 actions you could take today to make progress in that area. All right. So you're probably going to have to pause it for a little bit if you're still writing, but I'm going to jam into our next area, which I call is the top 10 tips of people that have been successful staying out in the field. So this is what they're doing. They're embracing personal and professional growth. They're reflecting on short-term victories, and this is how they're doing it. They're chunking their life down, their professional life down. They're chunking their cases down. They're saying, wait a second, this client might have had a terrible session the session before. They didn't seem to make much progress, but how can I engage them today, and how can we have a different outcome? Today is not yesterday, it's today. They engage in exercise. They all seem to engage in not just like huge groups of engaging in support of personal friends, but you know, introverted people probably are more comfortable with smaller groups. That's fine. But as long as you're tight and close and having a good time and feeling connected, you're practicing the art of connection, and that will rub off in your professional life as well. And of course, I always got to give a shout out to number 5. It's the ability to say no. How can you say no? In the helping profession, what I've seen compared to the business profession, there seems to be more people willing to say no. Like, this is my limit. I can't actually get that done. In the helping profession, it's almost like they give you more clients. You don't really want to turn people down. You want to help as many people as you can. And it really kind of falls or makes you potentially fall into that cycle of burnout. Number 6 is to develop a strategy to deal with repetitive negative thought patterns. Now, this is the real deal. This is the like the real life stuff. So it's like the how. Well, how do you actually get out of a negative thought pattern? First is awareness. Wait a second, I'm thinking the same thought. I've been thinking it the whole week. I hate my job. I don't really like working with this client. I get stressed out. You find you catch yourself, you become more aware that you're you're practicing the same negative thought process. It's going to be reinforced in your emotions by feeling stressed out and probably becoming more detached over time. So how do you change that? We're going to talk about that strategy right at the end. That's the actual nuts and bolts of how you do it, because you got to shift it and you got to take action. Ask the right questions. This is exactly where we're going with this. Decipher between what's a judgment and what's the learning path. Similar to that video I sent out to you by Marilee Adams, which she wrote this phenomenal book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. So rather than just cast a judgment that this client will forever never go anywhere, or this agency is going to never respond differently than what they have, or this director is bonkers, or this job is terrible, respond with the question, what could I do? Could I change the situation? Ask these more open-ended questions that lead you down to the path of getting better. How could I make the situation better? How could I better prepare for myself to be with this client after a really downer session? Use deep breathing. Hopefully we'll get time to do that today. And then, of course, time management, planning, and prioritizing. I've been actually doing a lot of seminars in the business world about time management. And I think there's not enough of this done in the human service world. So it's kind of providing the balance, getting good at planning and prioritizing. And there's separate programs for that. So I definitely would go out and explore some of the real famous books out there, like by Stephen Covey, John Maxwell. They provide really great tools and even workbooks on how to get better at time managing, prioritizing your items, and getting to the stuff that's really going to make your day juicy and alive. Of course, get support from a coaching counselor. Maybe EAP if you think you're slipping into burnout, or a good mentor. So organizational tips. I'm actually going to interject. I'm going to take some airtime for this because in my experience, I've gone to so many like prevent burnout seminars, and we do all these great things for a day, and then I come back to the agency and I'm feeling totally refreshed, and then I go right back to my 20-hour, 25-hour caseload, client contact hours with my 50 million hours of paperwork. And within usually a week, there's kind of a fizzle out on that initial momentum. So I think to really make an impact, and this is a shout out to directors and managers that might watch this video, this is the second part of it, is how do you support it on an organizational level? What kind of objectives do you have as an organization to promote a healthy counselor environment? And I've been part of agencies. I've seen it. I've seen them burn out people within a year. And it's, how does an agency stay away from the hypocritical, messages of like, oh, we really want to support you, but here, by the way, this is a totally unrealistic client case list that you're going to have to take over until we can hire somebody else. So it's kind of what I'm speaking to the choir about is workload, a reasonable workload, efficient workload that's also going to make the organization operate well financially. Group support. So reflective supervision, I've done some of those groups once a month, having therapists get together with somebody on the outside that's trained in this model that can give them that reflective process environment that allows them to kind of unload the stuff they've had at work and get perspective from their colleagues on it. And that investment allows them to make the transition better from going from work to home. Self-care, how do you promote it? Do you have an agency like, let's get together, let's do a 5K together. Let's have, maybe a 30-minute lunch that people talk about like what things they're doing for self-care, where their strengths are, what they're doing well, what they think they can improve on, and get like maybe brainstorming ideas on that. Education, and instead of cutting continuing ed, figure out how you can maybe collaborate with another agency to bring the cost down so you can continue to give your counselors, your social workers, your supervisors, your directors, those vital trainings that, are new to the field, that are going to evidence-based, that are going to help them produce like good results. So for instance, I went and did the training with Scott Caldwell at the UW-Madison on motivational interviewing. and have done now coaching sessions with motivational interviewing, and I've seen its profound power. So you want to invest in those kind of things. And then you want to actually look at the physical environment. So just by getting new furniture, shifting offices around, adding some new paint on the wall, some new pictures, it's amazing what environment can do to mindset and perspective when people walk through the doors. So I'm going to get to the big question, which is how. So those of you out there in webinar land might say, well, Ted, that's fine and dandy. I know about burnout. All right, I get the 10 protective tips. I'm doing well. But now tell me, how do I do it? Because I've gone to so many seminars or webinars, and so in one ear out the next. And if you don't put anything into action after you get done listening to me right now, you're probably going to remember a few good ideas. But over time, what the learning research says is that fades with time. So if I have any one wish for you today, it would be that you take some of these ideas and you put them into action by the end of today. And then you practice it over the next week, putting at least one item into action. Because I think over time, you'll begin to shift things. I think if you hear this, it might set you up for growth later on. But if you don't take any action over the next, I'd say 2 days, it's probably most likely, as much as I would like to think that I speak profound words of wisdom, you'll probably forget about it. It's a natural human tendency. So I'm bringing it back. Old school with Albert Ellis, rational emotive therapy, which we're all probably really familiar with. But he really talked about the activating event, looking at your beliefs about the event, and it having emotional consequences. I mean, it's a pretty simple idea. We probably teach it to our clients, but we probably don't use it in the paradigm of burnout. So I'm going to use myself as a case study. So I'm going to reflect on some past experience I've had in the trenches. I'd say, all right, I walked out of an in-home session and that client is completely unmotivated, and I think they're under the influence of substances. My belief about the event is, wow, what are we going to do? Number one. Number two is, man, this case isn't going anywhere. And as I'm driving home, I'm probably going to begin to feel, and I have felt this way, like, wow, why am I even doing this kind of work? This is like a hopeless kind of thing. I need to get less of these cases. I need to get some more of those easy adjustment disorders or clients that just want coaching. And so what I really like about this old school Albert Ellis is let's use it on ourselves for a change. And so what I found to be really helpful, and this is going to chime into our next slide, is asking myself the question of, like, is that belief actually accurate? Are my assumptions accurate? All right, this particular, I could think of one particular. We'll call him client A. Marijuana dependence, anxiety and depressive disorder. We're there because they're having family problems. But 2 sessions before, when I tested my assumptions, he actually made some progress. He just slipped back into the throes of addiction. But I lost track of that in the moment and allowed that moment to build, it could build up over time, where then I become discouraged completely about the client, and maybe I behave differently as a therapist. I'm less open. I'm more confrontational. I want to get some movement on this. And so a real tangible tool to use is question your assumptions. Ask the questions. Am I getting all the assumptions? Am I viewing this client the correct way? Are there other things out there? Are there other possibilities out there? And then hopefully create a change for yourself. So this is it. Questions, thinking ruts. So here's the 3-step plan. It's become aware. First, when you're the judger, which is this old school cognitive thinking errors, black and white thinking. This isn't going well for this client. It's at my fault. I'm not doing the right approach. What's wrong with them? You go down that path will lead you down. It'll probably lead you into a cul-de-sac. And then you have to hang a U-turn and come back out and figure out where the better path is. And that's where the other path is the challenge, learner, and grow questions. So change the fault, the blame to what has happened. What are the facts? What are my assumptions? What do I really want? What are my choices? Taking some responsibility. Could I, like for in this circumstance, I said, I got to get more experience doing motivational interviewing. I've heard so many things from my colleagues that this is effective. I want to get some training in that. I'm going to talk to my supervisor about that. Unfortunately, my supervisor said, yeah, you can totally go ahead and do that. We actually welcome it because it's evidence-based, and that's kind of where the field is going at this point. Actually, I'm going to go back to this because the final thing is take action. And I'm going to repeat that. Take action, take action, take action. If you remember any 2 words from this webinar, Ted says, take action, take action, take action. Because when you take action, you begin to open up door number 1, which leads to door number 2. I can think all I want about a dire situation or why it's not going to work. But if I don't take action and shift into more of a learner mode and then say, wait a second, I want to talk to my supervisor about it. My supervisor could say no. I could pass the judgment that she's just going to say no and it's not going to be approved. Or I could actually take action and she says yes. And by the way, Ted, this is like a great thing we want everybody to do. So then I end up getting into door number 3, which is teaching my colleagues about it. But I never get to door number 3 without taking action. You got to turn the doorknob and open the door. And you're not going to know where it's going to go, but you got to take action. And of course, the 3x5, inhale, exhale, breathe. So this is a shout out to my wife, Jill, who's a yoga teacher. She's all about the breath, posture, all that good stuff. But I call this the quick and dirty 3x5, inhale, hold, exhale. So basically what it is taking a 3 to 5 second inhale, 3 to 5 second hold, and a 3 to 5 second release. Do it 3 to 5 times. And I guarantee, just try the method out. Just do it after the webinar, and you'll notice a physiological effect. It's calming. Here's a quick tidbit to wrap things up. Get a breakfast or lunch going with Ted. Just kidding. Get a breakfast or lunch going with colleagues, talk and debrief about the job. I mean, this is being done in innovative agencies. This really kind of curbs burnout and stress and increases or decreases employee turnover. I heard this one in a seminar by a participant, and I decided to put it on as a TED tidbit with props to them. They said what they do is when they drive home, they find a physical landmark. In this case, it was like a grocery store, a Walmart that you'll pass every time you're leaving work. And when you pass that physical landmark, begin to transition home. Work is done. At home, remember, you can't do anything at work while you're at home. So quit letting it occupy time in your head. It's taken away from your contact with your loved ones and what you're doing that's going to be fun, exciting, and passionate. Exercise after work, no doubt. That's a really good one. And take vacations. So I don't know at this point for questions. We do have one question that has rolled in, which is how do I do this if I feel like the agency is unhealthy? How do I stay healthy in an unhealthy place? Well, I think in general, just kind of thoughts pertaining to that idea, which I think sometimes actually doesn't, I think it actually happens a lot of times, is definitely conversate with your colleagues. I think I've seen stuff done internally with like lunch and breakfast outside the agency around some of these identified areas that I've talked about to debrief and talk about some of the work struggles. But I think the important thing with having those kind of groups is definitely have the group have a commitment to problem solving and framing things in the positive and in the action mode. Of course, you obviously want to push, test the waters by talking with your supervisor, director, maybe having some colleagues get together and come from a proactive approach rather than a blaming approach. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you for tuning into today's webinar, and you can give me any follow-up questions at tedisidore@gmail.com. And I also do, I'm actually getting into doing personal and professional coaching for very specifically healthcare professionals, as well as supervisors. And I do some organizational training as well. So I want to wish you well. And I'm hoping that everybody that listens to that's a counselor and social worker, you stay out in the field as long as you want. And when you leave the field, you feel really good. Take care.